In this video, we're going to style React Modal. That's the third-party component we've been using. Now, it's a third-party component, meaning that it comes with its own DOM structure and its own set of classes. We're going to have to explore how those work, then we're going to override their styles to get things looking like we want. When it comes to styling this stuff inside of the box, we're going to go through the exact same process. We'll create our own classes, we will style those classes, and we will use them in our JSX. But when it comes to things like this overlay and the actual box, those aren't generated by us. So we have to figure out how to style them using the structure React Modal already has in place. Step one to getting this done is to explore what React Modal is doing over here in the Elements panel. That's going to give us all the tools we need to actually override the styles. So let's go ahead and knock that out. Over here, we have our modal box and our overlay. As the modal opens and closes, you can see that something's changing in the Elements panel. Right here, a new class is being added on to the body. React Modal __ body -- open. And they're using the exact same BEM naming convention that we're using for our own code. So they add this class onto the body so you can target your application specifically when the modal is open. What's more interesting is inside of the body. Right here, we have this React Modal portal div, and this is where React Modal puts your modal code. So if there is no modal, we can see that the React Modal portal div stays in place. It's just empty. As a modal opens, we get some content inside. This is the overlay. So it has the React Modal overlay class. This is the background that has the opacity, and that also contains our box. The box is inside. So if I crack open our div, we get another div. This is the React Modal content. And if I crack open that, we get our actual content, the JSX we defined. We have our title, we have our paragraph tag, and we have the button. So what we need to do is figure out how we can target this and this in order to add the features necessary. The first thing we're going to do is resize the box to take up just the space it actually needs, as seen here. And we're also going to transition the box in and out, as opposed to jarringly opening and closing it instantly. Getting all of that done is going to require us to write some new styles, and we're going to toss that in a brand new folder inside of the components folder. I'm going to call this one _modal.scss. Before we write a single style, let's go ahead and actually import this. At import, from the current folder, we want to go into the components folder, and inside of the components folder, we have our brand new modal partial. Excellent. Now that the modal partial is all set up, we can actually style the modal. Now we can either start by styling React Modal itself or by styling the content we've put inside of the modal, and I'm going to start by styling React Modal itself. So to kick things off, what we're going to do is target the element that has a class of React Modal portal, which we just saw over in the Elements panel. Now when the modal first opens, we get a div inside of there with no class names. So what we're going to do is target that. Now I'm using the greater than sign to say I only want to target divs that are direct descendants as opposed to being children of children. And what we're going to do is just set a single property. We're going to set opacity equal to 0. So when the modal first opens, before it really is considered open, we're going to start it off with an opacity of 0, meaning that it's never going to show up to the screen. It's going to be part of the DOM, it's just not going to be visible. What we're going to do is transition it to completely visible over the course of about 200 milliseconds, which is going to create a really nice effect. Down below, we can go ahead and start doing that. Right here, we are going to once again target React Modal portal, the class, and we are going to look for inside of there an item with the class of React Modal __ overlay, which we also saw in the Elements panel. This is where we're going to define the transition style, telling the CSS exactly which property we want to transition and over how long of a time frame we want it to transition. For us, that'll be transition. The property we're looking to transition is the opacity. We're going to transition it over 200 milliseconds or a fifth of a second. You could change that value to fit your needs. And then we define the function we want to use to actually transition it. It could be linear, but we're going to be using ease in and out. That creates a really nice effect that looks like real motion where things accelerate and decelerate, as opposed to a basic linear motion where it looks kind of artificial. So with the transition in place, we're not quite done because we still have to set up the opacity to 1 somewhere. And we actually don't want to put that right in here. We can try it, but we'll see what happens. So opacity equals 1. I'm going to save the modal partial. Over inside of the browser, I'm going to go ahead and crack it open, and we can see that it shows up right away. That's because of how this div gets added to the DOM. So what we need to do is use this React modal overlay after open modifier. That's what's going to allow us to actually set up the open styles. So in our case, what do we want to do when the modal is open? We just want to set opacity to 1. We can actually copy this selector, paste it down below, and just make a change. Instead of targeting React modal overlay, we're going to be targeting React modal overlay with the modifier that we just saw after open. After open, we want to set opacity to 1. Now, if we go ahead and save the modal partial, we're going to be able to watch that modal transition in. Right here, we can see it faded in, a real nice effect. The only problem is that when we close it, it goes away pretty jarringly. Now, why is it going away? It's going away because React Modal Portal guts the entire div right away, which means there's no time for the transition to actually take place. Transitioning in is easy, transitioning out is a little bit harder. Lucky for us, React Modal does give us a tool to make this slightly easier. Over inside of the modal initialization, what we're going to do is tack on one more prop available to us. This is the close timeout ms millisecond prop, and this takes the amount of time you want to wait before gutting the div, before completely ripping it out of the DOM. In our case, we're going to wait 200 milliseconds. To exaggerate the effect, let's just go ahead and make it 4,000 milliseconds, which is equal to 4 seconds. That's going to allow us to explore exactly what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and open up the modal. Right here, we have our overlay with the after open modifier. I'm going to click OK, and you can see right here, we have the before close modifier showing up. Before close sits there for the entire time, for all 4 seconds. All we're going to do is change that to 200 milliseconds, and we're going to target the before close modifier. Over here, we can take this one, copy it, and paste it down below. Then we are going to target not after open, but before close. And we're just going to set the opacity to 0. Now we're going to be able to see that effect in action. I click the button, the modal opens, it fades in. I click the button again, and it fades away. We have that 200 millisecond time between the modal getting quote unquote closed and it actually getting gutted from the DOM. And in those 200 seconds, we go through the process of transitioning the modal from being completely visible to completely see-through. Then when we actually get the modal, it's already see-through, so the user isn't going to see any sort of jarring change. The modal doesn't just get ripped away from the viewport instantly. Now let's turn our attention towards actually styling the box itself. So if I crack open the modal, we have this white box, and currently it takes up basically the entire browser. And we can explore that. We can open React Modal Overlay. Inside of there, we have React Modal Content, and this is where we have all of the default styles. So we have it positioned absolutely, and we put 40 pixels between the edge of the box and the edge of the browser. So if I make the browser wider or I make it narrower, it is the modal content that changes. The 40 pixels is still distributed on all sides. We want to go ahead and actually override these styles. Now we could define our styles targeting React Modal Content that overrides the guys here, but React Modal gives us a way to just define our own styles. And the first thing we need to do is set up a custom prop over here. And this one is actually just class name. So when we provide a custom class name, React Modal isn't going to use those styles for the content. Instead, it's going to allow us to set up our own by targeting the class we're defining right here. And we're just going to call this one modal. Now, if I save things by default, it's going to look worse than it originally did. We've created this new class, getting rid of the default styles. We just haven't provided any of our own styles. So if I crack this open, we get something that looks pretty terrible. But now we're going to be able to actually set things up as we want it. And the first step is going to be to target modal and set the background. So right here, we're going to go ahead and set background equal to, and we can use any of the colors we have available to us. I'm going to go ahead and stick with our light blue. And now if we save the modal partial, we should be able to at least see that. So the modal is showing up correctly, it's just clearly not positioned. So before we focus on styling anything else, let's go ahead and get this box positioned correctly. And to do that, we're going to be using Flexbox. So inside of React Modal Portal, we have our overlay and we have our content. The overlay is what we want to tweak. So we want to apply Flexbox to this, allowing us to center whatever's inside, which is the modal content itself. To get that done, we're going to add just a handful of styles right here. Just to kick things off, we're going to be setting display equal to flex. That is going to enable Flexbox. This is not going to give us what we want. It is going to enable Flexbox, but you can see that things look arguably worse than they did before. What we need to do now is center that both horizontally and vertically. So we'll start off with a style value we've already seen before, justify content. Instead of distributing the space though, we're going to be using center. We don't want to put the space around or between. We just want to take all of the content and center it. Now we're going to go ahead and add just one more to align things vertically. That is align items. This is another Flexbox related property, and we're going to set that equal to center as well. So we have things centered in both directions. And if we save the modal partial and crack it open, we can see now we're getting a box that shows up right in the center of the screen, and it only takes up as much space as it actually needs. So the only thing left to do is to actually style modal, making it look a little better than it already does. Then we'll be all done. We'll have the modal completely styled. We already have the background in place, so we can move on to the color, which for this one is going to be white. We can also go ahead and set a max width. So if we do have a really long option, we're going to go ahead and prevent it from actually expanding this out. Instead, what we're going to do is just cause it to wrap by setting a max width equal to 30 REM. Then we're going to go ahead and remove that blue border we were originally seeing by using outline, none. And finally, just two more. We're going to set the padding on all sides, putting a little space between the edge of the box and the content inside the box. I'm going to be using the L size variable for that. And last but not least, we want to go ahead and center all of the text. Text align, setting the value equal to center. Now, if we go ahead and save the partial, we should be able to see the box correctly styled. And right here, we are indeed getting nice styling for the box. The last thing left to focus on is this stuff inside the box. Our modal title, the modal body text, and finally the button. So we're going to be creating two element selectors on modal, one for the title and one for the body. The button has its own set of classes, so we're not going to worry about styling that here. Modal title, and then down below that, modal __ body. We're going to go ahead and add some custom styles for both of these. Before we do though, let's just go ahead and set up the classes. So over inside of option modal, we're going to be adding the classes onto the H3 and the paragraph tag. Class name equals modal __ title. And for the paragraph tag, class name, modal body. And we can also toss on the button class while we're here. So class name, setting it equal to button. Now, if we save option modal, we have all of the classes in place, and all we need to do is actually style the things we just set up. If we open it up, we should see the button style showing up, which is great. We're just going to target these two, then we'll be all done. The first thing we're going to do for the title, actually the only thing we're going to do, is adjust the margins. So we're going to remove the margin from all sides except for the bottom. So margin equals 0 for the top, 0 for the right. We'll use the large size for the bottom and 0 for the left. Now we're going to be doing the exact same thing for the body, so we can copy that, but we are going to be adding other styles onto the body. On the body, we're going to go ahead and kick things off by setting up the font size right here. Font size, we're going to crank that up a little bit. Let's use 2 REM for the font size for the body. And we can also go ahead and adjust the font weight if the font family we're using supports lighter weights. I'll go ahead and set that equal to 300. Now, if we go ahead and save modal, we can see the changes over in the browser. I'm going to crack that modal open, and what do we get? We get a nice styled modal. Everything is looking really great. If we wanted to, we could further adjust the spacing. So it looks kind of goofy having this large space between the title and the body. I might actually take that down to M size and see if that looks any better. Right here, that looks a whole lot better. So this is what I'm going to stick with. Now, when we are testing styles, we also want to make sure to test those edge cases. So let's go ahead and do a few things. We're going to take does this work and paste it a few times. You can use any string you like though. Just go ahead and type a few words out and paste it maybe 30 times. So we're going to have a really, really, really long string. If we add this, we can see that over here it looks good enough, right? A reasonable expectation for what we might see. We can't really prevent the user from typing something really long. So if we remove everything, let's go ahead and see what happens when the modal actually shows this. I'm going to crack that open, and there we go. We can see that we are constrained to the 300 pixel width, and it's not breaking the user interface. Now, what happens if we have a really long word? So I'm going to type uppercase W a few times and then just paste it on itself, coming up with a really long word. And this time around, you can see we are breaking the user interface. So right here, our W's are pushing off way outside of the box, creating left to right scrolling. And if we open the modal, we're getting the exact same thing. So the problem here is that by default, words don't break, meaning that if we have a really long word, it's not going to break onto the next line. We actually have to use CSS to get that done. Over inside of the editor, we're going to first tweak the modal body since it's sitting right here. And the style we're going to be setting up is called word break. And we're going to be using the break all value. That's going to ensure that when we do have these really, really long words, they get broken up into multiple lines. Now we're still seeing the issue here because we haven't fixed that. But if I do open the modal, we can see that now our really, really, really long word is at least breaking, making the UI more reasonable. It's not perfect. We can't really do much more, but it's at least not kicking things off to the right-hand side of the screen. Now we also want to do the exact same thing for the paragraph right here, and we set up the styles for that inside of the option partial. We have our option text. All we're going to do is set up word break all, and that's going to ensure that the user interface over here also breaks those words. We can go ahead and get things set up. And right here, we see the W's are indeed getting broken. Once again, if someone does choose to do this, the user interface is going to look ugly. We can only do so much, but at least it's not broken. We can still remove the item and add something new. So there we have it. We have the application completely styled. The items we add show up. Everything looks nice. The errors are styled, and the modal is styled as well. In the next video, we're going to look at some mobile considerations, making our application work just a little bit better on those mobile devices. We'll talk about how we can test for that sort of thing and set up the correct styles in the next one. So stay tuned. I'll see you then.